PCs, which I think when you guys were starting out,
there were no consoles or PCs. Except for Amir, he's young. Except for today.
Yeah, there were consoles and PCs when I was starting.
Okay, fine. How old are you today?
I'm 32. Thanks, Chris.
It's fine. You just take it from here. So when you guys decided to go indie, consoles were maybe starting to peter out a little bit. PCs were coming back in. Is that right? Is that how you felt about the industry at the time, and how you positioned yourselves? And
well, consoles have been about to peter out like 5 times since we've all started. I mean, there's always the like, oh, consoles are doomed. Oh wait, no, they're not. Oh wait, they're doomed. Oh no, they're not. So, are they doomed now? I think they're doing well now.
So for me, it was actually the opposite situation that we're talking about. So if we're thinking, 2007, 2008 time frame, which is when my first game that people actually know about was released, which is not remotely my first game. That, like Steam existed but was not publishing independent games. They tried it with 1 or 2 small games and they failed, and they said, sorry, we don't have that stuff. They rejected great. Xbox Live Arcade accepted it. So it was a little bit the opposite. It was more like that was, at least business-wise, right? The console side was coming up, PC was down, but always, always when you think you know what's happening, it's probably about to change into something that you don't know, right? And then that situation very rapidly flipped over the next couple of years after that. But it's a astable or metastable process, right? It doesn't oscillate cleanly. It just changes a lot, and you don't know where you are at any given time.
But for me, I mean, John was in development. So Amir, I remember Greg and Amir brought Bastion to my house while I was well into SpyParty. SpyParty was already a thing.
Yeah.
And
year 217.
Yeah, and they had this game. They're like, can you check out our game? You were there that day? I can't remember. Yeah. So you were over, and so we all had lunch and did a crit with Bastion really early, and then they shipped, another game. So he's gonna lap me, and the question is whether Pyre laps me 3 times. And so like it does just keep changing. And so I just because I know my development cycle is absurd. I try not to make any decisions based on that stuff and just try and make the best game possible, because this stuff is gonna cycle in ways you can't predict anyway, right? So as long as you've got a good game, I mean, I keep it running on controllers, for example, for a bunch of different reasons, and it's on PC now because it's the easiest place to develop. But I just try and assume that I'm going to put it, like, tablets were going great and we're going to take over the world, and now nobody buys tablets. So, like, if I had been tablet focused, as opposed to making sure it would work on a tablet, then, hey, I made a huge strategic mistake. But if you're making a good game, then you don't have to worry so much about it. It's like Neil Young, who used to work at EA, had this talk he used to give about, there's some things, like, it's called sailing, not rowing, and basically going with, going with the flow of how things are, and seeing, don't try and push all the time, like kind of go with things. But one of the things he said, and there's some good things in this talk, like one of the things was like there's some things that affect you that are just the weather. You can't control them, right? So it's like whether or not the PS4 or the Xbox is on top, or whether or not consoles are a thing that year or not a thing that year, those aren't variables under your control. But what is under your control is doing an awesome game. It's more under your control than the other stuff. So if you focus on that, then whatever happens to the platform at the time, hopefully you'll be okay.
Okay. Yeah. So Amir, you've a lot of your games, or your games have come out on lots of platforms.
Yes.
And so you have. How do you make that choice? How do you order, the releases?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for us with Bastion, we did everything sort of serially. So we came out on Xbox Live Arcade. Largely, actually, we were super inspired by the success of Raid and quit our jobs in EA in 2009, formed Supergiant. But when Bastion came out in 2011, it was long sort of at the tail end of what ended up being XBLA on Xbox 360's heyday. So talking about cycles, we hit towards the end of that cycle.
Well, and there's another process happening at the same time, which is that the platform has an agenda.
Right.
And that agenda had shifted away from games like yours into other things that they wanted to come up.
Right, and you never know, but yeah, the cycles within the cycles and the people who are there and what their priorities might be. But at the same time, we were super lucky that the second platform we released on, which was Steam, which was about a month after our initial launch, was happening to go exploding for small digital games like ours. So we did everything we did with Bastion. We made a decision to go on the next platform, and then we made a decision to go on the next platform. There wasn't like a strategy.
You wrote this thing about when you did the iPad thing, because you also hit the iPad right at the right time.
Yeah.
And the game was compatible and looked great on that form factor and everything. And this whole idea of like, I remember reading this thing, I don't know if it was a blog post or something, said out loud or just tweeted it, and there was this thing about by not trying to simul-ship everything, you can make the best possible version for that version.
Yeah.
And then I guess all you're doing is trading off like big bumps versus lots of smaller bumps in terms of marketing.
Yeah, I mean, it can be that way, but in our case, because we took the time to make each version its own thing, we did it ourselves. I mean, I think it ended up people on those platforms, they were experiencing it for the first time, so they were excited for it. I don't know, for Transistor, we did a similar thing. We did things largely serially. We did console and PC for the first time, which Sean did as well, but then everything after that, we just done one at a time, because it's a lot easier to make because things change so much. It's a lot easier to make those decisions like around the time when you know they're going to ship, because you could start very early on something that could end up waning right when you're doing it.
Plus, you're just dying. I mean, there's just so much to do. I mean, you guys have.
We have 12.
Yeah, and so like this is a little bit bigger than John. I mean, I'm by myself.
As an artist, it's like the idea of taking on multiple platforms is terrifying.
Yeah.
For the amount of work.
Right. Amir, I think I remember an interview that you did, possibly with Dean Takahashi, who I think I just saw. There he is, right there. Where I think you were talking about, how the larger game developers treat a port, it maybe in not such favorable light, but how you treat it is slightly different. Like you really play to the strengths of the platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah. So we try to imagine it as if it was, as if it belonged there in the first place, which often means doing things to your game that can be uncomfortable. Like in Bastion's case, for iPad, the stuff we did with the touch, we ended up taking out a lot of the core functionality in Bastion, which is dodging and moving and shooting and independent aim and all that stuff. None of that stuff feels good on a touch interface. All you do in the default touch interface is position the kid in the right place, and he attacks and does all that stuff himself. So that isn't like how we started. We got there slowly by first trying to translate everything directly as is, realizing it didn't work, and then you keep changing and changing and changing. And that's with a game that we had finished and we understood. So I can't imagine like how challenging it would be to sort of design your game for multiple interfaces at the same time, simultaneously.
Do you guys, now that you've got experience of 2 in the can, and do you guys try to at least think a little bit ahead now?
Yeah,
or?
We do. That was after Bastion, from Transistor on. It's not that we think of platforms, but we do think of like the interactions. And there are certain kinds of interactions that are just incredibly challenging to sort of put in multiple places, especially if you haven't made a decision yet on what platform you want to be on. So that I think sometimes maybe it constrains us unnecessarily, but other times it's really useful for us to think about, well, if we try to do this another way, are we going to be stuck?
So one of the things about going independent, and I want to kind of ask you more about that later, but the benefit to that is that you own your IP, so you can re-release it, you can port it, you can. How do you think about that from a business perspective? Like, what are the sort of business decisions that you make when choosing a port or choosing platforms?
John, do you want to do your game engine rant here?
That's not really a business rant. I mean, for me, it's not fundamentally a business decision. There is a business component to it, but part of it is just, look, if people are going to work really hard to make something for years, then you ought to be able to preserve that thing into the future well, right? There's no real reason why we shouldn't be able to. And, maybe you can even get money for it later, but prior to that, like, can people even play it, without busting out some janky emulator that like barely works, and which is less and less of a feasible option as time goes on and computers are more complex, right?
You know, it's a lot easier to emulate a Super Nintendo than like a PlayStation 3, for example. So that's it. You know, I haven't ever done a large-scale re-release of a game on a future platform that was a primarily commercial endeavor. That'll probably happen eventually. But for me so far, it's mostly just been about making sure that the work that we do doesn't, you know, rot. Like if you're a painter, you don't want to paint on like apple skin or something that's just going to rot away, you know, in 5 years. It doesn't make sense. Now, there is a game engine component of that rant, which is like, do you really want to use something that's going to rot out from under you and remove your ability to do that re-release? Because you know, if you have to rewrite large parts of it, or you know, it's kind of ported by someone else and ported sloppily, the feel of your game's going to change, and you know how hard we work to make that right. You know, it's people who haven't thought seriously about that just say, oh yeah, we'll just, you know, Unity's portable or whatever, or Unreal's portable, we'll just run on something in 10 years, it's fine. But it's really not fine. It's really almost impossible, actually. So, but none of that is business. Right?
Well, it's clearly business. You can take a business take on it. Like, I mean, you want people to play your games, and presumably they're paying money for them eventually. But for you, the primary thing is art. But I mean, you would hope that it's worth the port, for example. You guys use your, it's all custom code, right?
Yeah, it's our, I mean, we started in XNA, but yeah, it's our custom engine.
That's so strange. Well, all three of us are no engine. That's weird.
Yeah, it's our own
that's rare,
C# custom engine. So we've been doing it all ourselves.
Huh.
So.
Okay, yeah. So you all have your own engine, and Jonathan, you were gonna, you have your own language, right? Or you're.
Yeah, we haven't released anything in it yet. Yeah.
Okay, is that that seems like a very ambitious project?
Well, you would think so, but I mean, the reason that it doesn't get done more often is everybody thinks it's really ambitious, but having forayed a certain percentage of the way into that so far, I can say it's less challenging than the game that we just shipped to make an entire programming language debugger ecosystem. It's simpler than you know, 50-hour AAA first person, or not AAA, indie. Like an indie with high production values, first person puzzle adventure with 50 hours of gameplay is way harder than making a programming language, actually. So you might as well, right? If you plan to do several of those games, right, and you foresee that you can make them a certain percentage easier, and improve your quality of life for the rest of your life, because you don't have to be miserable using the C++ thing that everybody hates but puts up with, then you might as well do it. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I want to go back to you know, what advantage or what it was that sort of drove you to become indie, each of you, and what things you sort of took advantage of at the time that maybe were related to the platform.
You both quit EA.
Yeah, I quit Electronic Arts. I worked on the Command & Conquer team. We did Command & Conquer 3 and Red Alert 3 and the expansion pack for that game. And then I wanted to start a company, and was super inspired at the time. We were playing games on XBLA and Steam. So we were playing Braid, World of Goo, Plants vs. Zombies. Those were some of the games that of the scope that we were playing that made us want to do it and think we could do it.
Sorry. So what was it that working at EA didn't give you?
What did it do to you?
Oh no, dude, EA was great. So here's what EA taught me: we did not miss a single day. We never missed a day at EA, and I think for a small studio, that is like a great piece of DNA to have.
That is not a lesson I learned at EA.
Yeah, I know, because you worked on Spore.
I was on Spore.
I worked on games that had to hit the fiscal so that you could work on Spore. Anyway, so basically
I think Will mentioned you by name in a team meeting one time. He's like, thanks to Amir for sweating it out down there.
No, thanks for all of us down in LA. Yeah. Anyway, so making Medal of Honor and Command & Conquer. But we basically,
okay,
no, I'm fine. I'm okay, Chris. I'm okay. So working on big teams was great, but like everything we did was to mitigate risk. It's like, like large teams can't take any risks because it's just hard enough to make a game in the first place, and then make a game where all your VO has to be recorded like 9 months before it ships, and your levels have to be done at a certain time and all that. And we just felt like we wanted to make something more personal and felt like a human being had made it, which is what we detected in those games that were inspiring us. So we quit and decided to try it.
So, and
like, can I? It's interesting. We took different things away from EA, both positive things, but like for me, during Spore's development, there was this Rob Pardo, who was a designer, chief designer at Blizzard guy at the time. He gave a talk at a GDC in Austin and gave a talk about depth versus accessibility and how you do depth first, then you do accessibility. And I was in the middle of Spore development during this time where we were doing accessibility first and just never got to depth. And it's really interesting to have, like, No Man's Sky is causing PTSD trauma for me right now as they ship this thing, like the crits and line and stuff. But like, on Spore, like, there's tons of testing for accessibility, but no depth. And so, in the same way that you learned about this shipping, like this cadence, which you guys have clearly brought forward into Supergiant, like for me, it's like I'm just going to go as deep as I can on this game, period. Like, and just not care about anything else and make sure the core is there.
Those things are kind of mutually exclusive.
A little bit,
yeah. They are.
I mean, not totally. Like, you guys did all right, but you very much didn't have that kind of development process, right? Where it's like, we have a quality bar and we're not shipping till we hit that, right? Because that's incompatible with the idea of a schedule in the first place.
I think for us, though, we were looking for, the term we use internally is like complete. Does it feel like all the pieces there make sense and none of the things there?
Right, and clearly the games are high quality, like in terms
of
polish and stuff.
Yeah. So for us, that point we do try and, so we don't pick our date until we know that we can hit that point, basically, right. That point of completeness for ourselves. But we're lucky now to be able to choose that and choose what that means.
The other part that has to do with the control thing is like picking your date and things. I just felt totally out of control on Spore. I mean, I wasn't a designer. I like dabbled in design a little bit there, but like, I can't imagine what the designers felt like when there was just not any kind of like, I mean, there were a whole bunch of problems with Spore, but like at the end of the day, like the game was not great. And to have that slip out of your control as a designer and just be like, okay, we got to put this in a box at some point and not, I just don't ever want to have that feeling,
So that was what motivated you to...
Well, I mean, the control and the, like, I can make exactly the thing I want. Now, if it's any good or not is a different thing. Like, maybe I make the thing I want and nobody wants to buy it. Like, that's fine. I'll get a job at Facebook or whatever. I can program a computer. I don't think I'll suffer in the Bay Area, I would assume. But, but yeah, so if I'm going to pour myself into a creative project, like, I want to make sure I can, like, doesn't mean I don't want to collaborate with people. Like, I have an artist working on SpyParty 2 now, actually, and, like, it's great. And, like, do crits with friends and that kind of thing, and it was open beta, and I take tons of ideas from the beta testers. But being able to be the final arbiter of, like, what goes in the game, what quality level it is, and that kind of thing is just super important to me. Like, it's like, I want to make a piece of myself and put it out there in the world. Spore had a lot of cool stuff in it, but it didn't feel like there was a lot of the personal thing that, there. Yeah, there's compromises all the time. And I mean, there's compromises, you make a judgment of, like, I don't have to listen to a boss, but I have to figure out whether I'm going to eat next weekend, right? So, like, there's tons of compromises everywhere, but I get to pick which ones they are now, which is cool.
Yeah. How about you, Jonathan?
I never had a real job. So it's a totally different situation, right? I've always been the personality that has to do my own thing. Even in school, I wasn't really doing the classwork. I was doing my own projects with predictable results on my grades. So what I do today is just a natural extension of that, but it's that kind of thing, like having found the focus that I'm really interested in and going forward in a clear direction, as opposed to when I was younger, I was just like doing random stuff all the time, or like in the indie game barn. It's like, well, for this 6 months, I'm doing this thing, and then I change my mind and whatever. And I think a lot of people do that, right? It's my impression that a lot of people who self-identify either as independent game developers or wanting to be that soon have a similar thing where they kind of stumble around and don't find the right direction. And I don't know what to say about that. This is off topic. Let's not go into it.
John, he's never had a real job, but he did make a ton of money on Braid and then spent it all on the Witness, which is a very brave thing to do. Like when you've got it and then like, all right. And I'd be like, why are you going to spend all the money? He's like, he spent more than all the money. Ended up borrowing money. So like that's an incredible decision to take a risk.
Double, man.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. What you're doing is pretty powerful. So it's pretty. I mean, having just now told him not to spend all his money, and I just spent all my money, and probably gonna have to borrow some money. Like, so I'm like, okay. But do you guys? I mean, I assume you guys, now that you made it, are not gonna risk everything.
No, we do the same thing.
Do you burn it all the way to the ground? Right?
Well, not. I don't know. You always plan not to go all the way, right? That's always the plan.
Right.
So for Bastion, we put in our money and, set a date that is before the money runs out, and then you end up giving yourself a little bit more time and a little bit more time and run right up against it. And we were just really lucky that Bastion did so well that we were able to fund Transistor in a similar way. And we grew from 7 to 12, and we haven't grown anymore, and I don't think we plan to really, but that's it. Yeah, just keep putting the one from the last one into the next one, and keep doing. I mean, for us, the goal is just to sort of stay together as a team and keep making games together. So that's good.
Yeah, that's great. Have you ever felt that the reasons that sort of got you into being indie have like you sort of recognized that in the way that you operate now that you manage people and I guess you're not growing, but if Jonathan, you went through a big growth spurt for the Witness, did that change? Did you start to recognize things in yourself about how the process was going, where you're like, oh man, is this going the right way? Is this everything that I, don't want to be, or is this?
John loves managing people.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I went from if you go back to the Indie Game Barn days where I was.
We had an office that we shared with a few other indies. It was called the Indie Game Barn. That's you threw that out there completely out of context.
Nobody knows what that is. And I was doing these random projects, and they were largely technically motivated. Like, I'm going to build a game around a very difficult technical feat that nobody knows how to do, and whatever. And then the game wouldn't really be a game, and whatever. But those were completely me doing everything, right? So to the extent that they were art projects, I had very good, not just control over everything, which is what these guys were talking about, but good. I want to say something like agility or dexterity, where when I felt like something needed to happen, I could do the right thing, only limited by, for example, if it was a technical project, my technical ability, right? You start losing that a little bit. So, I did Braid, David Hellman, who's in the audience somewhere there, did almost all the visuals for that game, 99.99 something percent. And that, on the one hand, it's better because, hey, I can't do that and get the same result. Like if I had painted Braid, it would have looked very different. On the other hand, right, you give up a certain amount of agility, right? Because I don't have those art skills, then if it's still an art game that I have an opinion about how it looks, then it becomes a discussion to make things happen, right? None of this is surprising to anyone, right? But that just gets way worse as the team size grows, right? So the Witness was pretty hard. But going into it, I didn't actually know, can we make what is essentially an art game with a 10 to 14 person team? Is that even possible? I didn't know the answer to that. It was possible, but it's very hard, right? It's sort of like if you're trying to, say you're trying to play Jenga, right? But you have involuntary muscle spasms all the time and or a degenerative muscle disease, so your arm won't go where you want it to go, and like,
who are you talking about?
It's actually, and it's like that. It's a very frustrating experience of like, why can't we just do the obvious thing that just needs to happen, but somehow we can't, right? And I feel like that's the kind of thing that, as companies get bigger, sometimes they get paralyzed by that kind of thing, and then they can't do anything good at all, right? Even though there's people in there that want to do good stuff. And so the process of growing a company, to me, is a process of working very hard against that tendency. And so there were things in the process of The Witness that now, having done them, I won't do them that way again. Mostly I think it's, if you're going to work on a long project, rather than working with outside people who may be very smart and very much expert in their thing, I think I would verge more toward bringing people in-house, even if they're young, or something, and train them up on the game, because people who are thinking about the game all day, and that's their primary thing that they care about, are going to be more with it and more harmonized than somebody who comes in from the outside with expert knowledge and who thinks about your project among 4 things that they're thinking about, right? That was a long answer, sorry.
I have a full-time artist that's been there for 4 years, and he's awesome. He does all the SpyParty art, all the art that people like, at least. There's the art that I did that people don't like. It's a cult classic. And then just have a new junior person that we've just started working with. And so it's a lot different than having more people, and there's no one like I don't have any other programmers, for example, so if I need to make something happen programming-wise, that can happen, it's just my own limits. But even then, even at 2 people, like the communication gap is real. I don't know, you guys have more of a, so for me, like, we managed to get done, like, he might, John the artist, like, might be grumpy during a crit, but he takes crit really well, art direction, and, like, he's obviously phenomenally talented, and he has great ideas, and everything works. So I lucked into it in some sense, and he can also do everything, so he's like 5 different artists in one, so I don't have to have 5 different people. But I can't imagine more than 2, 3 people, 4 people maybe. Like, I can't imagine being his size, let alone your guys' size. So I don't know. You guys have a much more collaborative, like, vibe going on, though.
Yeah, we do, but I think we don't have so much, except for like engineering and design. There isn't anyone there who does the same thing as someone else. So it's like a audio person, 2D art person, visual effects person, 3D person. So a lot of the authority is in the fact that that person has to go off and do everything in that particular craft. So yeah, I think we probably run into a lot of similar problems. It's a lot of conversations when things have to happen for us, but we found a lot of success actually. Like, the best collaboration is like the smallest one, right? So it's like as few people as possible means usually you can move the fastest, and so that means like the hardest stuff for us is stuff like UI, where it's like it has to be 6 of us in a room. There's like, because you need the visual effects, it has art direction, it has audio feedback, it has an engineering component, and every designer has an opinion on UI. So stuff like that, it's like just like making a button is like pulling teeth sometimes for us, and where to place it, and how the feedback should be done. And that's a perfect example of where, yeah, the bigger you grow, the harder some of that stuff can be. But on the flip side, a lot of the other stuff goes, when you work with people long enough, goes really fast. You know who to pull into a room to just figure something out.
My approach to that, by the way, if it's something like a button, is I just do everything in the lame version, and then I just say, here's where the files are located. You guys can like swap in the stuff. And then at some point, maybe it needs to be changed a little bit to become the good version, but at least there's something about it being there, and then the sound guy can drop in the right sound effects. But I put the $1 sound effects off a website in there to begin with. It just makes it happen a little better.
No, we always have more success when we just make something and then people improve on it than when we ideate something as a group and try and solve a problem sometimes in a theoretical way. And that's when you get into more trouble.
I'm kind of envious of, like, music does this the best, like the band thing. Like, you've got these 4 people, and they make this amazing thing together. And there might be one person who's kind of in the lead or not, but that collaborative thing, I just think that games, somebody who plays guitar versus somebody who plays piano versus somebody who plays drums are much more similar than somebody who programs versus designs versus does art in a game. And so I just think it's a lot harder to get that kind of collaborative synergy thing going.
Yeah, and that's the reason we want to keep it together. That's the magic, at least for us, is that it's those things all working together and having had worked together for long enough, and that you can still tell it's us whenever we do stuff.
Cool, that's great. So I'm gonna open up to questions in a minute. So if you want to get your questions ready and maybe stand behind the mic, but I have to ask you about the future and virtual reality because I know someone's gonna have that question. You know, how presumably you're gonna stay the same size team, Amir. You're not gonna want to grow, but how do you feel about like virtual reality as a
I mean, our games are all 2D, so I mean, we have 3D models and stuff that all become 2D sprites. I think the thing for us is, like me personally, I'm super excited about it because other people are really excited about it. If that makes any sense. Like I've lots of talented people I know have gone on to go and do that stuff and to work in that space. And I think for us, we're excited by everyone's excitement, which seems more genuine than like when a company just decides that they're going to hoist a hardware initiative upon the universe. This is like a lot of people actually want to do this from business angle and technology and games and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I don't know if we have a place in that with the stuff that we're doing, but right now our focus is on the games we're making.
I'm not a big VR fan. I mean, I don't hate it or anything. It just kind of bores me. So, so for me, it's like if it actually sells tons of units, fine. If it's another platform, sure, I'll put my game on there, assuming it works. You know, but it doesn't interest me as a thing I want to go work on or anything like that. It doesn't seem like, for me at least, the things that are interesting about interactivity, emotional connections, and you know, like all the stuff that I mean, we can go into that, but all the designy stuff that's interesting, it's not really in that space. That much for me, so it's just like it's kind of boring. So I'm not. Yeah, I'll be reactive more than proactive with it if it's a thing. I don't think it'll be a thing because I don't think anyone's going to want to wear shit on their face. But that's a totally separate topic.
People already do.
John's a believer.
I'll probably make a VR game at some point. We're not working on one right now, but yeah, it's actually a very interesting design space, I think.
I mean, I'm a terrible pundit because I thought Steve Jobs was going to fuck up Apple when he came back. So, like, what do I know? Definitely don't listen to me.
The other thing that I'll say about VR is that I feel like, you know, I've tried a bunch of VR games, and almost none of them really understand what I think, or almost none of them seem to agree with me about what I think are the strengths of the medium and are designed toward that, right? So when people say they're designing for VR, they usually mean more like, well, you know, we don't have accelerating movement on the gamepad that makes you barf or something, right? And that's fine. That's like level one of that. But there are things that are very, very intrinsically interesting about like, hey, I have a 6 degree of freedom viewpoint that I'm moving around, and I have a couple of controllers that track very nicely, depending on which platform we're talking about. You can do a lot of things with that you simply have not been able to do any time in the history of video games, ever, right? And that seems cool, right? Anytime you can make a statement like that, that's pretty cool. So, yeah, I mean, the reason that I'm not working on one today is probably just that we have so much to do.
Sounds good. All right, let's start here and then we'll come back.
Hi, so I wanted to take this question maybe a little bit back to the posted topic about the forum in terms of developing on the consoles and the PCs, and I'm just curious, I guess, what you really do see as some of the differences in terms of how you develop, or maybe not differences, both kind of current and past looking as well as forward looking. I mean, I looked kind of back at the time that there was Xbox and PS2, and PS2 people said, well, it had sort of this unique architecture and it was difficult to develop for, and then some people said the same thing about PS3, and now it seems like the architectures have converged a little bit, and
Thank God.
How does that make a difference in terms of what you develop, or does it? And when you look forward to, if you do, the next generation, what do you see happening there? Do the console architectures and designs actually have a chance to sort of shape the types of games that you're doing, or at this point, is it just kind of like a tool that's a commodity and you're just going to build what you're going to build regardless of what the platform is?
Are you talking about core architecture of the thing, because or the input devices and stuff, because that's the input devices obviously totally change.
I think you mean CPU.
But do you mean CPU and that kind of stuff, or what do you mean?
CPU and architecture, and we went with we had SPUs and so forth with PlayStation 3, and just kind of how that all.
I have sort of an answer for that. It's certainly much less restrictive, right? So the common idea of what's happened is that we've moved much more toward an architecture that's like what's on PCs with the new console generation, and that's true, and that's good in a lot of ways. It means you don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops just to have your game running in the first place, right? Which was even true through the PS3, if you had SPU code. Anyway, so that's good. However, a lot of people who want to get excited about programming maybe think that that's bad because they can't do as much tricky stuff anymore. But I don't think that's the case. On a modern CPU, there is a nearly infinite amount of tricky stuff that you can do to make your thing run faster. And in fact, I can almost guarantee that almost no programmer at any game company, large or small, actually understands everything that's happening between the line of C++ source code and the actual transistors that are flipping on the CPU. There's so many things happening and so many levels of indirection now that it's kind of crazy. And someone comes along and they understand something about cache associativity that somebody else wasn't thinking about when they wrote some code, and they can get it to go 4 times faster. And that kind of opportunity is still all over the place. And games are so complicated now that you can basically allocate an infinite amount of time to doing that stuff and running faster and still get major wins. And so we just run out of ability to do that now. On a more complicated, harder to deal with architecture, we would have run out of that sooner because we would have spent a certain amount of our time just trying to deal with the architecture, right? So that budget has been freed up. So overall, I think it's good. I think if you're a very tech-oriented programmer who wants to really dig down, there's plenty to do.
Well, the nice thing about a fixed architecture, even if it's similar to a PC architecturally, like a CPU and some memory and a graphics card, is that because it's fixed, you can go as deep as you want on those things, and that makes it so in some sense the consoles are still always have that advantage. They're going to be slower than the highest end PC, but you can make up a lot of the difference by the optimizations, and that'll still be true assuming they still sell millions of units, and it's worth doing that. That's why the new thing with they're going to upgrade the consoles is a little worrisome, because now if it starts fragmenting, you get a little less time to do that stuff. Not worrisome, I think it's a bad idea, but it's the PC is not a one thing. When you're developing on PC, you've got a ton of random platform crap that's just getting it to run on those different machines, obviously. But I think the input devices are way bigger of a influencer on the design of the games you can do than the architecture. The architecture kind of just goes from, is it just annoying me and so slowing me down versus if it's all a PC, you can just get it running and then do the optimizations.
Great. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Jonathan, last year you were kind enough to look at a game that guys from Dartmouth and Cambridge were developing on the Arctic. And I want to ask you all, the whole panel, about your thoughts on serious games and how one goes about learning about something in an entertaining and interesting, engaging way. Because I got the pleasure of working with the finest Unity levels developer, most creative, skilled guy I've ever come across is over right there. His name is Bakr Shah. Bakr, come on, stand up. You all need to know who this guy is. He's really low key, but he's amazing, okay? And he developed this beautiful thing, but our guys said, well, you just go from this area to that area, and when you cross an area, you get a little thing that pops up and says, oh, did you know that jet exhaust is really awesome over the Arctic because it's 5 times more severe? And Jonathan, you made this wonderful comment. You said you don't like incidental learning. You go from place to A to B and you learn something. Are there any other paradigms or models for how to give someone an experience in a 3D environment, and we are going to do this in VR, without it being so pedantic, if that's not the
Yeah, I mean, games already teach you stuff. Every game does, right? It teaches you the rules of that particular game. So there's already a very very, very large body of examples to draw from. And so the challenge, and it's very difficult, is to just find a way to do the thing that you want to do subject matter-wise in that form. And that's hard, but that's why game design is hard. Most attempts to be very serious when people make serious games very rapidly kill the game part, and then they're not good games. And
No, I have nothing to add to that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Before I ask my question, I just want to thank Amir for his sacrifices at EA as a longtime fan of Command and Conquer. I appreciate that you guys made that happen. I was a big fan of that series. So my question is, I come from the marketing end. So a lot of times there's, I don't want to say adversarial, but a relationship where goals are not always aligned between coders and the business, marketing, biz dev side and the community side. And I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on how, as someone from the marketing end, how can I work better with developers to help them show off the wonderful games that they've made, because sometimes they're very protective of it, you know, or at least some of the devs that I've worked with in the past have been protective of their material, and they kind of don't want it to see the light of day until it's absolutely perfect, but it'll never be perfect. So how do you balance that, or you know, how does it look from your guys' end of the spectrum?
there's a really good YouTube clip that I watch sometimes of Alec Baldwin and Glengarry Glen Ross, where he just yells at guys for 7 or 8 minutes. And I think you play that for them and tell them to get real.
Okay.
This is serious.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a hard question.
Well, you guys, so here we'll take that and make it a little bit easier to like
make it easier
discuss
for me, Chris.
So you guys don't show your games
until we're ready to show them.
Well, I mean, by definition, no one shows them until they're ready to show them. But you guys show them later than say I do.
Yes.
You would never have shown somebody what I showed them.
Yeah.
So maybe talk about that, like with the.
Oh well, for us it's like more. We only want to show the game when it's ready to be played.
Well, I did that, but it's just that there was also the polish end, which you guys did.
Yeah, I guess that's just I don't know where that is. I guess it's like because it's a lot of us. It's a personal comfort thing, right? So it's like we all want our piece of the game to be at the point where we're really, really happy with it being in the world, and we want to know how people think about it and how people feel about it. And so yeah, that's, I don't know. For us, it means all of us getting to the point. I mean, when we show our games, we like agree. We like make sure we all agree that it's ready to be shown.
But the difference with you is that you guys have that skill of understanding what it's like to relate to the public.
Yes.
Right? And you're taking that into account when you make those decisions and make your plan, right?
Yeah.
So I believe what we're talking about is sort of working with developers who don't necessarily have that skill. They would like to, right? But they just kind of don't know what to do. And I mean, I think the answer has to change, right, if you don't have that skill, because then you're just going to work hard on a game and then nobody will play it.
Right,
and
no one will know that it exists.
That's what happens to most indie games.
Right.
So,
I mean, obviously, marketing and the development team should be on the same, they have this exact same goals and everything. Mm-hmm. To the extent that that doesn't happen, I mean, the places I've seen that not happen, like at EA, where there's more of an adversarial relationship, has a lot to do with, like, treating the development team like, oh, they're missing these deadlines, you know, like, I mean, not understanding that the thing you, I mean, it's kind of like what you're saying, like you shouldn't show it until it's ready to be showed. You just guys have to come to agreement about what ready to be showed means and why those are the important things.
And I think we struggle just as much as like probably an EA does internally, because it's like, yeah, you want to be working on the game, but the same asset that makes the game better is the thing that gets you your banners for store placement, you know, or makes the submission art and the box art and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, you can spend a month on a trailer, and you know, you look at any AAA game, they release like 7 trailers. You know, it's like it's the guns of this game and the campaign of this game, and they all have their teaser and all that kind of stuff. And certainly independent games, some of them, if they have the resources, they're able to do that. But that's the constant battle internally for resources over spending the time to expose the game versus making it better.
Do you think it's for all of you guys? Do you think it's a good idea for maybe more reasons than just this to start with a demo of the game, like something that's essentially the E3 demo that you would want to show people to sort of say, this is the idea of my game. I just haven't built the rest of it.
I think it depends on the kind of game. Like with SpyParty, it's an esporty kind of game, and so you can have one map that works and then sell it to people. Whereas a game that's more story-based, or has puzzles in it that have to. You can't do that. So it's just a very different thing depending on what kind of game you're doing.
Yeah, I agree. It probably depends on what you're making.
Cool. Thanks very much.
Yes, sir.
Hi, this question is for Amir. And first of all, I'd like to thank you guys, Supergiant Games, for some of the open source stuff that you've contributed to the community. And this question kind of ties into that. I remember a few years ago seeing Bastion show up on native client and Chrome.
Yeah.
And that was one of the only examples I could find online that was game related.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, at the time, I thought, wow, this is actually kind of risky because it's a very experimental platform. So I guess my question is, being a small team, how do you guys make that kind of decision to say, hey, I'm going to risk some of my time on something that's, may not be as mainstream like native client was back at the time?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is the personal excitement to do the thing is a huge part of it. It's not like if you're coming first to a platform, there's always a big opportunity, right? But if you're coming to a mature platform, you know what the scale of the opportunity might be. That's a part of your thinking, but for us, it was like the excitement to do something with it. So that's what drove the native client version. For sure, it was an opportunity to do something like sort of technically that we'd not done before, and to have a version of the game run in a browser and all this kind of stuff. So for us, we were like excited to be a part of that, and the same thing with touch controls and stuff. We were playing a lot of games on our iPad and wanted to see our game there and to see what it would feel like to have our game there. So that motivates a lot of it for sure. It's like not necessarily all cerebral.
Right.
Kind of like, well, now we're going to hit this. Like I said, there wasn't a plan. We just kept doing one after the other until we stopped, which we like barely stopped, right? Like Bastion came out on Vita this year or whatever. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes, you sir.
Okay, so in 2016, is it still worth it to make a custom engine right now? So obviously you guys all did that, and if you're a small indie team, it's a lot of time and effort to do that, right? So do you still think it's worth it to do it or not, versus using Unity or Unreal, anything like that?
So you obviously have time and budget constraints and all that, and what I would say is it's probably for most people starting out, you're much more likely to ship a game if you don't make an engine, right? However, have a plan to get off that. Have a plan to transition. That's actually how I program also. I'll write code that this isn't the ideal optimized nice version of this thing, but it's all I need for now, and it's going to get me going, but I have a plan for if and when I need to replace this, then I know, right? So just have a plan and actually follow through, build those skills. Maybe, if you're in Unity to start with, and there's like 4 major components you want to buy from the asset store, just build one of them and buy the other 3, and then you can interpolate upward from there.
My argument for custom engines has a few different things. There's the thing that John said, where you control over the code allows you to do things later. There's a kind of more arty, weird one that I'm not sure how true it is anymore, but because people have done a lot of crazy stuff in Unity, but it used to be you could just smell an Unreal game.
You could feel the Unity default lighting package on everything.
You could just smell it. You load up a game, and you're like, oh yeah, it's Unity.
You still can almost.
A little bit, but there's games like Firewatch and games like that where you just people are pushing it in ways that are like, oh, I wouldn't have immediately known. And so that one's not. I think there's still. The question is, did those people save time if they had to rewrite so much stuff and do so many shaders and stuff to pull it away from that smell? And I don't know the answer to that because I haven't worked in these at all.
I got to add we're kind of over, but the thing that I always say to clarify that situation is using engines like that helps you get started quickly. It doesn't help you get finished. In fact, if you have a great deal of attention to detail and you want things to be very subtly just right, it actually makes it harder to get finished because you have less control over what's happening. So just be aware that you're making a trade-off, and that trade-off may mean that you have less resolution over tuning what your game looks and feels like than you would otherwise, and maybe that's acceptable.
And depending if you've got the programming horsepower and the artistic, the polished desires, like that's huge. Like you don't get source code to these things. Like that was shocked me when I found out that you don't get source code to Unity. I just don't know how you'd ship a game if you don't have control over the source code. Like it just seems insane to me. Just there's so many tiny things. Like if you want to add this one little piece to the control, and if you mouse over it should do this thing, and you just can't because it's like deep in some DLL somewhere. Like that would drive me insane. I mean that's why I went indie, is to be able to make those stupid little time-wasting decisions exactly the way I want them.
All right, we have time for one more question. Yes, you, sir.
Hi, I've actually got a question about the relationship between, I guess you could say the relationship between concept, iteration, and discovery for you guys. Because I know for developers, everyone's a little different in terms of this, but trying to figure out in making a project, making a game, where you guys organically follow a thread and where you say this is diverging too much from what I initially conceived of. Because how much people go off and change what they're doing, or how much they self-censor, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but to say this is going too far from what I initially conceived of, everybody has a different approach to that.
This is a huge question.
Well,
yes.
why is that a problem if it's different? Why is your original concept something to stick to?
Oh, I'm not saying it is. I'm saying that everyone has a different approach to how much they want to diverge and how much they want to stick to their initial thing.
So the way I think about it, and John and I have talked about this for over the past decade a lot, which is this whole idea of, so there's knowing whether you have a good idea in the first place, which is hard, but you can kind of get a feel for like, one of the analogy John made like years ago, like literally 10 years ago, is like you're pulling on a thread. Like you've got a sweater and you pull on a thread, and you can kind of tell as soon as you start pulling on it whether it's just one of those little threads that's going to come out, or it's like, oh shit, the whole sweater's going to unravel if I pull on this. And you kind of like, you want those big ones. You're like, oh, there's something here, And so that's a little bit of an art form of like, it's a learnable thing, I think. But
it's
like
a development skill.
Yeah, it's a skill to like know when there's a rich field. And then for me, the way I conceptualize it is, and this was what I learned to take feedback and ideas from other people, from the art director of Spore, actually, Ocean Quigley, who was like, I used to be really protective of my ideas and like nobody can tell me what to do. And he was like, no, free ideas from other people are great. And if you actually implement one of their ideas, they're yours forever. And it's just, listening to an idea from somebody else is fine as long as you have a strong internal compass. So I think the key thing is having a strong internal compass. That doesn't mean you know the design you're trying to make, but you can test ideas against whether it feels true to the idea you're going to make, whether the idea came from you or you discovered it with a bug in the code or like somebody posted it on your forums or whatever. And so for me at least, developing that strong internal compass where I can go like, oh yeah, that's a great idea for SpyParty. Thank you so much. Or, that's not exactly right. Or, And I mean, you have to be technical enough to know what the scope of an idea is. Like, oh, yeah, well, that would double our development time, even though it's cool, that kind of thing. But like, developing those skills is super. I mean, I think that's the key to doing artistic work, like powerful work.
Yeah, I mean, for us, a lot of times when you just try something, the idea falls apart. Just like even just sitting down, when you would take the very first step, it falls apart. So as much as we can, we try and resolve whatever creative tensions where we may not know by just trying it. Doing the like really small version of it and seeing if it actually is the long thread or not.
For me, the pattern seems to be that the final thing is pretty far from the original idea, right? The original idea was just served as a starting point, and then you just have to have a feel for where the design wants to go and what the details are. Because the original idea is like, it's in your mind, right? And like a lot of things, like, for example, development schedules or things like that, it's at a low degree of resolution, right? It doesn't see all the little notches and difficulties that are going to come up, right? And so when you start making it reality is when you start really seeing what it actually is more accurately. And only then can you really make a certain class of decisions, right? Prior to that, if you made those decisions when it was just a vague idea, they're kind of ignorant decisions.
The same thing is true of programming, incidentally, like do it the shitty way and then you're learning. Like
you get in the territory and then you can see the thing.
The part you kind of dropped really subtly in there that I think is worth highlighting and underscoring is this whole listen to the game. Like he said, where the design wants to go, but there's this idea of listening to what the game wants as well. You've got this thing, and you can only do that once it's working. right? That doesn't, I mean, a whiteboard, you can't do that at all. So you get this thing going, and you're like, oh, wow, this actually turned out more interesting. You can see that that's a way, feel that that's a way to go. That is another skill that you have to develop of how to listen to the game and like kind of, I mean, SpyParty is very different than the way I thought it was going to go, but the core thing is still true to the original like thing I wanted to do, and I'm sure that's true of everybody, but that listening thing is a super important skill to cultivate.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our wonderful panel.
Thank you.